The following clip from the World Economic Forum has even landed in Sky News and should have people very concerned. By 2030, you will rent and own nothing. Whatever you rent will be delivered by drone. The USA will no longer be a superpower, but a handful of countries will dominate. The underlying values that once existed, that is the individual's right over the state and not the other way around, have been destroyed. Leaders of the West have purposely allowed the destruction of Western values. 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. I suggest slowly going through this clip several times and contemplating what this means for the next 10 years and what this will mean for you, and consider where you are today and what this means for tomorrow. You must also be informed on the history of climate change, which you will find on the website for every developed and developing country. They've been experimenting with weather control for decades. We need to have an intelligent understanding of this. You need to take decisive action for your family and friends at this time. People need to consider property ownership and where it's going to. When a country is a signatory to the United Nations, it means by stealth, and the ideas of this organisation, they are handed down to the world governments, to each country, and from those countries to the states, and then at the local level, at the council level, they're implemented. The ideas and philosophy of the United Nations are also implemented by teaching curriculum in schools, and particularly in the universities. As far as property is concerned, it is known as Sustainable Urban Development, and it's a UN initiative, and it's at the local council level, in the language in which they choose and in the way they wish to implement it, but it's still there. So the idea is to leave large tracts of land undeveloped by small private ownership and high development in the cities with a high level of tracking or surveillance. Now, through COVID-19, tracking and tagging people has been greatly accelerated, and we're going to a situation similar to that of China. Now, in once prosperous countries of the West, we have the sellout of our properties at obscene values and the devaluation of the dollar, and all the companies privatised and sold off. For Australia, this was in a Jesuit-led Liberal and Labor government, as commented on by the papers of the day, such as the Sydney Morning Herald. This was back in 2013. Of course, the whole idea is to kill nationalism like it's a dirty word and put it in the same basket as racism in the countries of the world under United Nations world control, because they have no individuality. It's in name only. But to be sure, whether it's the World Health Organization or the United Nations, the Vatican is placing its influence heavily on it. Its influence has always been there, and now it's even stronger. Before, through countries such as Ireland or Spain, it would, through its influence on those countries, determine what policies on population control would or would not be placed in the United Nations. And now we have the example of the Paris Agreement, which is backed. The whole agreement is drawn together on the Pope's encyclical that was written up in 2015. That's what makes up the Paris Agreement. So the amount of land that you are buying in Australia becomes smaller and smaller, and I've seen it down to 250 square metres, and yet you're paying astronomical amounts, which you have to pay back to the bank, of course, and so it puts the person in a real trap. For the ordinary person, of course, there is no freedom in it. The message within Seventh-day Adventism for a long time is to get out of the cities because of the coming trouble and the judgments of God that will fall. However, now in the more fertile areas of the country of Australia, we see that the prices are so exorbitant that many people would not be able to afford in areas where there's decent rainfall. Here we have this statement from way back, 1906. But my warning is that of the angel who, standing in Melbourne, said in clear and distinct voice, establish not schools or sanitariums in the cities. In the future, cities will certainly feel the terrible results of earthquakes and fires. Cities will be destroyed by flood and by lightnings. Out of the cities is my message at this time. So when will these judgments come? Already we see it. Consider the size and devastation of the fires 1 year ago. Started back at the end of 2019 in the east of Australia. Fires so huge that they created their own storm head of the fire front with lightnings, just as have been described in that statement. But these things will keep on increasing in intensity. Notice what it says. It mentions Melbourne, cities destroyed by flood and lightning. Now also California experienced this. The Lord calls for his people to locate away from the cities. Proportionate to their sins will be their visitation. When one city is destroyed, let not our people regard this matter as a light affair and think that they may, if favourable opportunity occurs, build themselves homes in that same destroyed city. Let all who would understand the meaning of these things read the 11th chapter of Revelation. Read every verse and learn the things that are yet to take place in the cities. Read also the scenes portrayed in the 18th chapter of the same book, written in 1906. So what did we find in the 11th chapter? It's talking about the rise of atheism and what happened with the French Revolution. And so we see this same turmoil in cities such as the US, with calamities coming on the cities, the burning of the cities for months. And as well, we have the UN plans for World Confederation and also the coming judgments of God. It means that people will not be able to get out of the cities unless they make their plans at this time. And if you're trapped in the city, as has already been seen, the food supply chains will be a problem. They can easily be broken, and the amount of land that one can purchase is not just able to support hardly anybody. The reference given to Revelation 11, as in the prior statement, is the rise of atheism in the French Revolution, but the point there being that the Jesuits were all that found power and wealth in that revolution while other people suffered. And that is exactly the picture we are finding in the US revolution today. So Pope Pius XI tells us in his 1931 encyclical, having railed against capitalism and communism as enemies of the people, he goes on to say, socialism is surely more moderate. It not only professes the rejection of violence, which you would find in communism, but modifies and tampers to some degree, if not reject entirely, the class struggle and the abolition of private ownership. So what's suggested here in his encyclical, that capitalism is a problem and so is communism, but here we have the answer with a socialist system. One might say that terrified by its own principles and by the conclusion drawn therefrom by communism, socialism inclines towards and in certain measures approaches the truths which Christian tradition has always held sacred. For it cannot be denied that it demands at times come very close to those that Christian reformers of society justly insist upon. Well, is that the model? Is that what they showed through the 1260 years of the Dark Ages? Why was it called the Dark Ages? Because the church dominated, directed the way of the state. Romanism used capitalism. When the deadly wound was healed, money was given to Mussolini, and that money was invested in property in the West, such as in the City of London, and its aim was to accumulate its wealth and take control of capitalism and obliterate the Protestant work ethic and to destroy the system. And the leaders such as the Clintons and the Bushes are part of that destruction, and a whole lot more people besides that. But that's just an example. The system that the church will draw from is a big business control of government in a church and state feudal system that they once enjoyed. The church is out to destroy and control private ownership. Look at the agreement that's just made between big business and the Vatican ending 2020. This is to implement a socialist system called inclusive capitalism. So it's really a Marxist system. Who was it between? The top 1% wealthy in the world. And who would oversee it? The Vatican. The Rothschilds, Rockefeller, MasterCard. The Rothschilds, for example, who are they known to be? The guardians of the Vatican treasure. That's how they were accumulating their wealth. Look at what is being promoted by 2030. Nothing is owned but rented, and you will be happy. These things were behind closed doors before. Now it's upon us. It's out in the open. Now the warning is given for us to be careful. The trade unions and confederacies of the world are a snare. This was written over 100 years ago. Keep out of them and away from them, brethren. Have nothing to do with them. Because of these unions and confederacies, what confederacies? The World Economic Forum, the Council of Inclusive Capitalism, the World Health Organization, the United Nations. Well, some of those are out of our control, but there are secret societies, there are unions. We have also in this tie-up of an example also of the Democrats and how they're working to bring the United States into this socialist system with the new president-elect. It will soon be very difficult for our institutions to carry on their work in the cities. Educate our people to get out of the cities into the country where they can obtain a small piece of land and make a home for themselves and their children. Ere long, there will be such strife and confusion in the cities that those who wish to leave them will not be able. We must be preparing for these issues. This is the light that is given me. So this is written in 1903. Also, we have persecution coming as described in Revelation 13. The mark of the beast that will come upon all the world. No man may buy and sell except they receive the mark of the beast. And we have it described as those who will not join to this confederacy will be killed. Revelation 17, the woman working through the fallen churches and its influence on the state, starting with the US, will kill and persecute God's people, where it says there, the woman, the whore, riding upon a scarlet-coloured beast is in the wilderness, and she is seen drunk with the blood of martyrs. Here is another scene, again from 100 years ago, looking towards our time. There was a scene presented to me. It was the night before the Sabbath. That is when that scene was presented. I looked out the window and there was an immense ball of fire that come from heaven, and it fell where they were casting buildings with pillars. Especially the pillars were presented to me. And it seems as if the ball came right to the building and crushed it. And they saw that it was branching out, enlarging, and they began to cry and mourn and wring their hands. And I thought some of our people stood by there saying, well, it is just what we have been expecting. It is just what we have been talking about. It is just what we have been talking about. "You knew it," said the people. "You knew it and never told us about it." I thought there was such an agony in their face, such an agony in their appearance. We need to trust God. Trust God in where we live and work into the future is paramount. That work I speak of is God's work, warning people of that which is coming and of the kingdom of God and his salvation. Soon land ownership will be worthless. Prophetically looking into the future again, it says the cause was languishing. This is in the time of trouble, a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. And God's people were starving for the truth, and we made no effort to supply the lack. Now our property is useless. Oh, that we had let it go and laid up treasures in heaven. And we can see from what is being said that property is going to be worthless. So we have to be wise in what we're doing. Terrible shocks will come upon the earth, and the lordly palaces erected at great expense will certainly become heaps of ruin. Written in 1891. When God's restraining hand is removed, the destroyer begins his work. Then in our cities the greatest calamities will come. 1897. The Lord gives warning to the inhabitants of the earth, as in the Chicago fire and the fires of Melbourne, London, and the city of New York. 1897. The end is near, and every city is to be turned upside down every way. Notice what it says, every city. There will be confusion in every city. That's what it says. This is the quote. Everything that can be shaken is to be shaken, and we do not know what will come next. The judgments will be according to the wickedness of the people and the light of truth that they have had. Oh, that God's people had a sense of the impending destruction of thousands of cities, now almost given to idolatry. Written in 1903. The time is near when the large cities will be swept away, and all should be warned of these coming judgments. Written in 1910.